Wonderful. Yes. So as already introduced, I'm Kate. My name is Kate, and I am somewhat of a researcher and designer. I kind of try to inhabit a space that's between art and design and cultural studies. And yes, I'm very interested in storytelling. So I lead the design and communications at Fablab Barcelona, and I'm faculty of within the Master for Design for Emergent Futures, which is delivered at the Institute for Advanced Architecture of Catalonia in collaboration with Eli Sava in Barcelona. And in this context, we use citizen-focused education and design research, as well as digital fabrication tools to empower people to make things. And we do this in order to help them to understand and empower them to be able to intervene in their local context. We really believe that the futures that we want tomorrow are enabled by the actions that we take today. So our Fab Lab is connected to an international network of identical hubs of making, education, design, and culture. And this forms a distributed infrastructure, which in turn facilitates exchange and collaboration at scale. And this is supported by open design, digital tools, and open knowledge. So as a lab, we really practice methodology and ways of documenting our processes, as well as disseminating our design methodologies to ensure that we have take up and impact of our research and our work that we do. So here you can see some tutorial style documentation that we've done. And on the left, you can see some 1,800 Fab Labs across the world with whom we collaborate. So in the context of Fablab Barcelona, I've been able to expand on an interest that I have in how meaning is constructed in the world and how cultural products influence popular narratives and vice versa. So I was originally looking at this space in relation to the climate crisis and the noticeable lack of cultural production that focuses on this topic. The image that you're seeing today, right now, is from the recently established Climate Visual Image Library, which is catalyzing a new visual language for climate change. So I'm really also fascinated, and I love this concept presented by the Long Now Foundation, that there is no past, present, nor future, only one long now. And that what we as designers put into the world today doesn't exist in a time capsule, but in fact, it shapes what tomorrow will be. So with this in mind, I wanted to talk about storytelling, something that I feel is a really great tool for designers, and not only should be used to speculate on what the future holds, but to actively create it by crafting design outputs that tell the stories we need of what is to come. And in particular, this is really important when what is to come, as Ori mentioned earlier, is going to be full of these kinds of normative extremes. So I like to think about storytelling as the meaningful wrapping that situates design into the world. There's this saying that everything communicates, and as such, everything is embedded with narrative cues that manifest through form or color or texture. To me, all design communicates, and all design tells a story. When we look at a piece of graphic design, like a poster or a sign, we're really aware, and we're kind of trained to be aware, that we're being communicated to. But the affectiveness of artifacts and spaces is just as great. For example, we are aware of the impact that the design of institutions has had in shaping our world. And these tell stories through a transmedia method. So this is comprised of symbols and form, but also language and rituals. So It's our challenge as contemporary designers to be aware of and harness the ability we have to use design to tell stories and create desired meaning. We can be aware of the storytelling potential of our influence. And we can do this in order to plant narrative seeds that in our long now can grow into fully fledged sagas, for example, of more just, sustainable, or inclusive societies. So the image that you're seeing here is from an exhibition called Futurama, which was at the World's Fair in New York in 1939. And this is really interesting to me because this place provided this really interactive experiential exhibit that was very hyper-technological and showed a future that was really driven by the highway and by the automobile. It was sponsored by General Motors. So this beautiful example of storytelling of the future, we can see potentially developed into an uncontrollable excitement over the potential of cars and cities, and potentially we can see the impacts of this today. So whilst we are used to using storytelling to research user journeys, speculate on the future, or communicate particular messages, storytelling has other secret powers that designers can use when it is integrated as a tool into the design process from the beginning. So I want to talk about a few of these from different perspectives, some that we're using in our workshop as part of the HIT International Design Week. This workshop that we're giving is called Storytelling Spaces, but today I'll talk about a few different perspectives of how we can use this approach. So the first, which you got a glimpse at before, is human connection. So storytelling is a really profoundly human practice. Since its beginning, when it was kind of thought to be brought about to understand death in Neanderthals, humans have used storytelling to link us to morality and our mortality. So it's always been connected to our emotional side and also to our non-rational reaction, so the affect approach. In the times that we are living in which we can't meet in person, stories have the ability to connect our hyper-local situations with communities at scale. So here I want to highlight a student project, which has now become a professional project by some of our MDEF students, which is called Link Journal. So these are ex-students of the Master in Design for Emergent Futures, and they're now working in the Fablab ecosystem in Barcelona. But these two designers are based between Barcelona and Australia. So Link Journal says it is a transdisciplinary journal exploring in-between spaces, modes of communication, and translations within creative practice. It is an inquiry into future thinking and cultural shifts. So Link Journal gathers a community, a global community, through storytelling embedded into the modality of the book that reflects its conceptual goal. So the book can be read online, or you can download it from their GitHub, and users can actually create their own version of the book using whichever tools they wish. So this is some imagery of this, which was Link Journal Live. They just produced this a couple of weeks ago. And you can see the different ways in which people actually start to use tools in a distributed manner to be able to create their own version of the book, inputting into the narrative construct of the design output. So the second topic I wanted to cover is the idea of discovery. So as designers, storytelling can help us to really see ourselves within a greater picture. This is a picture in which the designer is not the center of the universe, but is in fact part of a greater system. Homo sapiens' ability to organize beyond familial groups and cooperate at scale is afforded by storytelling. This is really created by our ability to collectively believe. So it's this ability that allowed us to stay safe, be resilient, and be advantageous as a species. But it also is what led us to be able to feel empathy for humans and non-humans alike. So storytelling is a great tool you can use to collaborate, to uncover the needs and desires of communities, and even imagine the needs of non-human identities. And any students that are watching that are in my workshop this week will understand what that means, because we've been working on actually embodying and personifying spaces that we've been mapping. So some students took on the persona of a public park, whereas others took on the persona of their bedroom. So this has been a very great experience. So the example I want to bring here from my own practice is a project I did in Utrecht in 2018, in which we mapped the city based on, or a neighborhood in the city based on stories, not monuments nor landmarks. So the map, developed by long-term and also new residents of the city, uncovered various use cases and needs that hadn't been spoken about in the community to date. So finally, I want to bring the topic of new aesthetics, which I think is a very interesting one. And I've watched the lectures this week, and I think this is very relevant. So in Fablab Barcelona, we use hands-on learning approach to experiment and prototype and design. And as designers, we work physically with our ideas. So we bring them to life, we birth them. And sometimes we birth new ways of working in order to make these a reality. Therefore, design becomes an extension of the designer's personal narrative, and telling its own story of creation, it also reflects the maker's values. New aesthetics can emerge, and these can also reflect the personal and also collective design process. And therefore, we see different kinds of values reflected in the outputs. These could be circularity, for example, organic materials, or sustainability. The examples that I'm showing here are from the Materials and Textiles Research Line, which is led by Anastasia Pistafidou at Fablab Barcelona, from a few projects, including our Fab Academy program, Fab Textiles, and Remix or Barrio. So, finally, almost everything you engage with in the world has been designed by a human. And as designers of futures to come, or designers for the long now, we must be acutely aware of the impact of the stories we are telling and how we construct meaning in and around our designs. Stories themselves are designed to share experience, to connect people, to warn of danger, or to position power, or find comfort. We find purpose, characters, drama, resolve, language, and semiotics, the devices of this story system. But further, creating design and interventions in the world today means we are creating inputs that exist beyond ourselves. And they exist with other people, with communities, and potentially into deep futures. As designers, I really believe that we're obliged to ensure the stories that our work contributes to are just and influence multi-narrative futures. More so, if we are, like I have been, inspired by the deep cracks that are starting to show. And in fact, this week is inspired by, as Ori was saying, the deep cracks that are starting to show in our social, political, and environmental systems. We should and we can aim to participate in forming new narratives and being part of rediscovering storytelling and its potential to be a self-fulfilling prophecy, a powerful creator of the long now in which we live. So I encourage you all that we must take responsibility for our ideas, our inventions, our design, our communications, and represent our values and our stories in our designed outputs. So thank you very much. I can stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Kate.
Thank
I thought
you.
that was super interesting. I thought the whole idea of talking about storytelling in this time, and well, we're in a time where the stories you're receiving seem to be, well, dubious at best. At this time of false truth, the whole idea of storytelling and enhancing the power of storytelling seems to be at, I would say, at a critical point of generating, I guess, trust. And I think trust is a commodity we're losing. So I found that super, oops, sorry. Super relevant to our time. Thanks for that. Miriam, will you take the next lecture, please?
Yes, I will. You didn't try to say my family name.
No, I have to admit, I make these mistakes once per panel, and after that I try to excuse myself from family names.
It's just perfect. Thank you for the lovely introduction, Ori. So I'm happy to be here and be part of the International Design Week. I'm happy also to be a part of the lecture and give you some insights. Just very brief to me, who hasn't met me yet during the International Design Week. I've been teaching design at the HTW Dresden in Germany since 2015. There, I'm currently representing a professorship for fundamentals for 2- and 3-dimensional design. In my teaching, I focus on narrative as well as Kate to design interactive and spatial experience in cross-media design solutions. Since 2010, I have been working as a designer and artist, creating interactive installations, and I develop holistic and cross-media works in analog and digital and time-based media, with an approach to space. I'm very interested in staging content of diverse cultural and political context. So I will try to share my screen now. Can you all see my screen? Thank you, Ori. So
you might want to go to present mode. Yep.
There you are. Thank you. So following up to that, the past few days, as well as for Kate, have been very amazing. It was an amazing journey, and I traveled really far from Shanghai to Hamburg and back to Holland and back to Berlin. And I could thrive through the students' inspiring designs and their imagination. So now I'd like to take you on a journey of my work. So in my practice, I aim to design installations as tangible as possible. In the literal sense of the word, I create narrative between the physical and the digital in order to design an engaging experience for the viewer, using a multisensory approach to involve visual, audio, olfactory, and tactile senses. For my design, I choose the media that's relevant to the message and the concept. Thereby, it is interesting to play with the human perception and experimentally question the design possibilities and the associated limitations of the physical and digital sphere. I'm interested in staging artifacts, as you see on that slide, of diverse cultural and socio-political context. This, for example, it includes the focus on the culture and the social practice, such as the Chinese ancient lunisolar calendar or food traditions from different cultures. I am particularly interested in the social practice that I explore in the field of food, how it is reflected in our culture and in our daily routines. If you look at the definition of food, you find immediately in the online dictionary the definition that food regards to any nutritious substance that people are or animals eat or drink, or that plants absorb in order to maintain life and growth. When we think of food, we think of a basic need, but beyond that stands a cultural and social grown practice. Food says a lot about how one behaves, what people identify with, and how they interact with one another. I'm curious about the way how food is eaten, is cooked, sourced, and reused, as well as old traditional forms of how food doesn't get wasted in diverse old cultures. In the project Future Memory, I address the field of food art in performative dinner experience. It is designed to provoke people to change their perspective from their European-centered view and guide them through the purpose of the food of the Cantonese and Hakka culture. Future Memory is an interactive installation which specifically explores the complex cultural realities in Hong Kong. Guests can walk through the spatial intervention and actively explore through the projections that are triggered by their movements. The projection screens consist of sewn rice paper, as you see here, and these are the sheets from the Cantonese lunisolar calendar that I mentioned earlier on. The film sequences are essays about various everyday scenes, as well as Chinese New Year scenes, and about the demonstration of the umbrella revolution in Hong Kong. I enhanced the paper not only with audiovisual, but with soy sauce and other spices and flavors from the dishes that were served, which actually worked out really fine for the material because it's wafer thin paper, but it's light, almost lucid, but still not translucent and strong enough to that people can work through it, touch it, immerse themselves into the smell and the paper. The dishes were selected to an explicit explanation of their meanings, especially for the Chinese New Year, which is a very important celebration to give good luck and fortune to the next year. Together with the chef James Hoyong Chan, I named certain dishes like How Being Ancient Tastes and Feels, where the noodles are not ancient, but the person eating it will become, because the belief is that uncut noodles, very longevity noodles, represent long life. Here you see James preparing our dinners. The artistic dinner performance for dark ecologists, Into the Wild, in the Gropiusbau Contemporary Big Art Space Museum in Berlin, 2020, built a bridge between ecology, philosophy, and fantasy. I got invited by the artist Duki Jordan to collaborate with her, and again with the chef James Hoyong Chan, to create and perform a dinner accompanying the edible art sculpture that you see here in the little film. And it happened last summer, even during pandemic situation, since the dinner was outside. The menu and the performance thematizes the staging of a dinner and its preparation using fire cooking with the down-to-earth concept. Individual courses for the menu, as you see here, are inspired by thinkers whose ideas are reflected in the menu itself, in the food, and positioned in the current discourse on the climate situation. The excerpt from the menu would be 6 ways how mushrooms can save the world. It's a recipe dedicated to Paul Stamets. Some of you might know him. He's one of the most famous mycologists in the moment. And there is also a dish called the Pyromaniac algorithm. And also Donna Haraway got dedicated into that. So a part of the challenging task in this performance collaboration included allowing the guests to watch their food being cooked on an open fire. So it included, for instance, a fire-burned clay enclosed Jerusalem artichoke prepared with underground cooking using the traditional hanging method originating from the Maori tradition and introduced anew for our Western audience. The setting uses birch bark plates and no cutlery, since so much taste, like I learned from the chef in our interdisciplinary collaboration, is an enjoyment of the food. It's about the texture, and your hands basically have function as another way of exploring the feel, the consistency, the makeup of your food. Senses of eating with your hands trigger something primal in the way you perceive it. The sculpture itself being a natural consumptible table, and the leftovers, it got turned into compost and consequently into soil again, which a full ecological cycle was completed for this sculpture. So that leads me to the deeper pandemic situation, if the new extreme is the new norm, like Ori said. So how to take over a space and design it during a special time like we are facing right now. And why not by creating a living lab during pandemic? In the middle of the pandemic situation, we acquired as an artist collective a small atelier space inside in the center of Berlin, and we were able to work. It actually was meant to work away from home and have a little quiet time, but we figured out behind the atelier was a small rough area with concrete ground. You see this? It was even more full of trash and things that were left behind from person that lived or worked there before. And seeing the potential of the space, we developed an idea to take it over, occupy it, even though we would not be allowed to, and to create a kind of a city garden that explores challenges of the cycle of nature in the city and design it through staging its potentials. The garden we set certain rules for it, and we started to experiment and decided on this living lab as an ongoing project, and see that the organic waste should be fermented by the bokashi method. So we are going in a cycle in a moment. We grow food with the compost soil. We eat from it and cook for our guests that are rarely coming in a moment because we're still in a lockdown. And we compost the rest and then repeat. So it's grow, eat, compost, repeat. This is what it is in the moment. So let me talk a bit really brief. I see, Ori, I don't have much time left. That's probably the message for me. To give an insight into the way I teach. How do I use this experience I have as a designer and artist, and how do I bring this into teaching? To give an insight, it is an exchange, and I would like to teach like this now and also in the future again in presence. And in the past semesters, I had the chance to organize several collaborative formats. And we wanted to explore there the teaching formats to address students in assorted ways. One of them was the format of a hackathon. My experience was that it can open up a field of experimentation for the students in which they can develop their designs, also try new technology, and have an intense iteration of their design ideas in a collaborative working atmosphere with agile and dynamic processes. Students really opened up, and it was very interesting, especially when it got interdisciplinary. People had to establish a social practice of communicating and a culture to start to understand each other from different disciplines. So that was a very special experience. So my last two projects that I like
Miriam, please take the time. It's okay. We've got time.
Yeah? Okay, good. Thank you. So it is a project that deals with participation, and it was called Participate and Change. So it is a mixed reality application that was developed to support discussions about urban changes, and so people could meet from a certain area to discuss certain arguments, and they got invited into a space where they could experience something, and we were able to build basically the original prototype in a very nice space in the university. And in the course, the students developed their design skills. They created these interactive scenarios, objects and spaces in the various fields. And they had design markups, but also interactive projections, and they had a spatial staging created. This augmented spatial concept I show you here is with the topic citizen participation in urban development processes. It uses this interactive projection in the room to inform the participants about the arguments and important information regarding the discussion. Through approaching the walls, the gentle fading in and out of the writing is triggered, so it gets a very playful moment that the viewers or participants of the discussion relax a bit and open up for certain topics. But whoever joined a participation like that, it can be also quite challenging for the moderation. So in the same project, another group of students developed a space, an interactive installation for exchange about this subject, digitalizing school. The ring element you see here was interactively accompanied to help the conversation of the protagonist. It was done by 4V in English, I'd say. And they developed a tool or a ring element that shows the participants how the discussion goes, if it's still a good sound of the voices or not. So they experimented with this and also built a prototype on 101. And they figured in a space to see what it would be to add a playful element to that. And I'd like to show you the film, a little excerpt of it. yeah, that was so far the topics I explored during teaching. I really can only agree, which would be also my last sentence, how important it is for me in teaching to tell them that they have responsibilities. I cannot agree more with Kate, who said it before me. We have a responsibility what we create and how we create it and for whom we create it. And I would like to give the students who are watching to stay curious, because that's one of the biggest thing for us as designers and artists, and keep the fire burning. Very much.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that, Miriam. I think one of the interesting things is the way your theme collides with the senses. Like, I was watching your presentation and I couldn't decide whether I was like stimulated by the food or stimulated by the visual or stimulated thinking wise. And I just thought all my senses are getting into the process, which I think kind of makes sense when you're working between the physical and the digital. And I think in a sense also in this time, I mean, there was this visual of people setting a meal while they're with gloves, and you were talking about the senses and food. And I just thought, and how we feel the food. And then there was this image of the gloves, and I thought, oh God, everything is so mixed up nowadays. Just seems that it's a very mixed mash of things. So thanks, that was super interesting. Professor Rama Gihiro, did I get it right? Will talk to us now on From Extreme to Mainstream and Inclusive Design in Action. So Rama.
Okay. I hope we can all see this. It's the most often asked question when you do a lecture nowadays. So is that on screen for everyone? Great, thank you. So following on with the theme of this week, we are looking at going from extreme to mainstream, the power of inclusive design. And I include this picture here mainly because my co-workshop facilitator and I, Evelina Gadjeva of the Design for All Foundation in Bulgaria, we were joking that on Zoom, everyone just thinks that you have a head. So I put this picture there to prove that I do have a body. It shows two things that I've really taken to in lockdown. One is restoring old things, and the other is gardening. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about inclusive design, but I come from a center, the Helen Hamlin Center for Design, that's used these principles to conduct over 300 projects with 200 organizations, products, systems, services. Bottom center, you can see Heathrow Terminal 5. If you like the wayfinding there, we did it. If you didn't like the wayfinding, they executed it badly. And there's two words in inclusive design, and one of them is design. But there is a problem with design, and it's summed up for me in these couple of slides. If you type the word designer into SMS or WhatsApp on your smartphone, what comes up is this picture. You know, the designer as artist, the designer slightly looking at like a sort of French person from the 1950s. And it's a real caricature of what a designer is. And I think the presentations that you've seen show that design can be more sensory, more strategic, more storytelling. Indeed, you know, even it has a real depth and a breadth. So I'm just going to talk about 5 things. under the context of inclusive design. Now, they're all 2 words each, because I know we're at the end of the day. Be human, be useful, make better, people first, and show leadership. So the first, be human. Design is around people, for people, by people, with people, because of people. It's pretty inextricably linked. And how does design relate to people? Well, inclusive design is defined by including the needs of the widest number of people in your design. It's a beautifully simple context, and especially those who are routinely excluded. Inclusive design has grown to become written into policy by governments, written into strategy by business, and written into community by neighborhoods. And this example of the Olympic Park, one of the reasons that London won the Olympic Games in 2012 was inclusive design. And these were the strategy documents that the park created to actually show that they were going to create a legacy of inclusivity and accessibility after the Games. It has a 30-year history. It was defined by one of the founding directors at the center, called Roger Coleman, in this paper that you see on the left. And we continue to create websites and publications around inclusive design. I think it's very much an idea that's come of age aspirationally, politically, and in terms of business and the public sector. It started off by looking at age, exclusion by age or disability. But it's rapidly grown. We describe it as looking at people across the age spectrum, ability spectrum, gender and race. And age doesn't mean older people. The one truth is we're all aging now, and age is really only relevant to your passport. And we talk about ability rather than disability. And yes, there are more than 2 genders. And race is one of those qualifiers that's just come absolutely into the fore in the last couple of years. In the middle of pandemic, there's been protest. And if you look on the right, typically design is for someone male, right-handed, the guy in that little white circle at the end, in the middle of the diagram. If you include people who have a variety and various needs, people on the edges of this bullseye, you include more people in your design consideration. So this is why we talk from going from the extremes to the mainstream. This was our conference in 2019, which was young, Black, female, and it really signaled a future of inclusive design on the global stage. It needed to be more inclusive. A very simple example of why race matters. This is a company run by one of the Royal College of Art graduates, Akeem, and he is from Nigeria and realized that glasses aren't built for the African features. So his company is all about reframing these things for the African face. Beware of super tokenism. So Barack Obama, first Black president of the US, but often described as a super token. He was just the president. He could have been Black, he could have been white, and some critics say that, was he a super token? Yes, he had a lot of representation, but what could he change by himself? On the right is some efforts made by a university, the Ontario College of Art and Design, where they're doing Black cluster hires, Indigenous cluster hires, so that people are networked when they step into these new positions. They're not the super token. They're part of a new community and new conversations. Inclusive design has a process, and this is one of them, but a lot of it is adding many activities to the fundamental processes of design, exploration, focus, development, and delivery. I won't go into that in detail because the students have been getting this from me all week, but it's quite simply put, inclusive design isn't just about looking good, like the peacock on the left. It is about doing good. And I love the fact that this chicken is sort of strapped rockets to her back, looks a bit messy, but she's delivering first aid somewhere. And this is what inclusive design in the field can feel like sometimes. A project that we did in East London was with a lighting group, looked at who owns the light in the city space. And this was an area that has seen a lot of change. You know, there's people who've lived there for 8 generations, a Bangladeshi community coming in the 60s. We asked the residents to draw a map of the area. And what is interesting is you get things that you don't see on maps, like a community divide according to race and according to wealth, where this road actually splits a Bangladeshi community with a kind of uber trendy middle-class London community. And because it was taking place, we were looking at what goes on at night. We also got that into our research. So chalk on a black, you know, on a pitch black paper sort of brings some of those sensory capabilities to life. So I really love your presentation just now, because, you know, design is a sensory thing, even if you're doing research. We held a sort of event in the community where we asked what the city at night should be for. People brought balloon representations of themselves. And these guys who were in trouble with the police actually came up with a really creative lighting idea, which was low-level LED lighting for the football pitch. The council had switched off the lights because they couldn't afford to floodlight the pitch. But this low-level lighting they could afford. And what happened with this is the community took over the space again. The drug dealers, the prostitutes moved on. So this low-level lighting transformed the community space. And the police said the crime rate went down by 60% in 2 months. So that was a long one, Ori. The next ones are a little shorter. I'm keeping an eye on the time. Number 2 is be useful. This one, I apologize to the students because we saw this, but can color change a person's life? Yes. In care homes, they put white food on a white plate, on a white tablecloth in a very badly lit environment. Change the color of the plate to blue, people can see the food and they can actually eat. And in some care homes, they actually put on weight. This is what nurses have to deal with and clinicians in hospitals. On the left is all the paperwork for a patient. And for people with acute kidney issues, you need to analyze their urine. And on the right is a piece of design we did called the wee wheel, which allows you to just turn the wheel, put in the patient's weight, put in the amount of urine they're producing, and catch a problem before it becomes too serious. And 10,000 of these are now out in the hospitals. This is our ambulance project. On the left, you see the existing ambulance with wardrobes in the back. The brief here was, could you restock the ambulance in 5 minutes instead of 45 minutes? And the answer is yes. Working with clinicians, with ambulance paramedics, the design was to replace the wardrobes with these 5 small kind of cases. At the end of the shift, you take them out and you put new ones in and you've restocked the ambulance in 5 minutes. Number 3 is make better. Make every conversation better. Inclusive design is not death by post-it notes. Yes, we do use them, but you don't just stay there. You've got to go out. You've got to talk to people. And I've been incredibly proud of the students because they have entered into this without question. It took them a while to get warmed up, but they have really thrown themselves into this. This is design. This is inclusive design. On the left is one of our designers, Peter, with an older woman doing her morning routine, her morning yoga routine to understand what health means for older people. And this was a project for technology company Panasonic, who had lots of words on pages, but very little human emotion within their research or human aspiration. When we work in virtual worlds, we do a lot of work with the emerging tech, augmented reality, virtual reality. And this is with the NHS and Oxford University. And there was really two drivers for this project. One is virtual reality has become so good that you actually feel like you're encased in a real world. And the second is that people with psychosis and paranoia can find it difficult after therapy to act in the real world, to go out in the real world. So we've been prototyping virtual spaces that allow people to role play, going to a cafe, going into a supermarket. And like a game, it's got different levels for you to, of difficulty, from just walking into a shop to actually interacting with people to being in the middle of an altercation. One of our participants actually cheekily said to me, I'd love this on a dating app so I can rehearse my lines in virtual reality before I go out for real. Sometimes not every answer is about technology. This was for an airlines who said their staff aren't using the technology. And there's about 200 staff from 14 departments involved in an aircraft takeoff, turnaround. We realized, and my colleague Evelina realized this by talking to people, that it wasn't the problem of the technology, it's that they had nowhere to put it. So we redesigned the fluorescent vest, the high-vis vest that they wear to contain the technology. Everyone started using the technology. They didn't need to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to redesign it. So we're getting there, Ori. Number 4 is people first. Really, really incredibly important. Hero the project, not the designer. And today's designers don't necessarily want to be the big names. They want their projects to have big effects. So work with real people. And here you can see some projects where, we've worked with older people on the left. On the right is our youngest ever participant for a project with Samsung. He's 2 years old and he's talking about how communities communicate to our designer, Chris. So Chris is the guy with the beard. He's not the one with the blue hat. Don't talk to fake people. If you type in personas into Google, this is what comes up. There's 7.6 billion people on the planet. Find a real person. Don't make up a fake one, because then you might as well be talking to these two, and what are they going to tell you? So when the pandemic hit, this really hit home for us. So the design community in London all wanted to help, all wanted to design a new mask, a ventilator, put their name on it and help the pandemic. Instead, we asked real clinicians what they wanted, and the answer was surprising. They said 40 to 70% of staff are new because they're students or retired nurses or retired clinicians being brought back in. They don't know where anything is. We spend most of our time orientating people. Can you help with that? So overnight, we worked with clinicians to just create some maps using building drawings. We designed this overnight, shipped it to them the next day, and you can see the response from this frontline clinician, this doctor called Laura on the front line. It reduced the amount of time they were spending reorientating people. And that for me was really the power of conversation. Another quick one here, I think the last case study is autistic people have to fill in questionnaires in order to talk about their likes and dislikes. And we just created this prototype of cards, of images, and they could just put it into boxes, categories of avoid, okay, or like. And it was a game changer for the residential homes we were working with, who house residential autistic adults. This was an absolutely magic moment in our research where James, the autistic adult on the left, he wouldn't enter into a room because he likes to have his back in a corner. He likes to feel secure. And our designer, Katie, who you can see on the right, their textiles designer, just sewed together some textiles that brings the chairs together. And you can see James entering into the space for the first time. And his care manager actually cried because she said she never thought he would ever sit down for a conversation. And these are some other people. You can see Katie there on the left blowing bubbles. The challenge here was, can you create a sensory room for $200 instead of $20,000? And the answer is yes. So very finally, show leadership. Inclusive design is not enough unless you show leadership. And we have this idea at the center called creative leadership. So, and the website is on screen. You can join there if you wish, creativeleaderscircle.rca. And it's just based on the 3 values of empathy, which is very much in inclusive design, and creativity in design, but balances with a tripod of clarity. These are human values. They balance each other. They integrate. You need all 3, but they do not link to qualifiers such as age, gender, race, and ability. Anyone can be empathic or clear or creative. So as a designer, as an inclusive designer, you design to understand difference, but as a human, you step beyond them. So these are the 5 values. And I just wanted to show screenshots of the students embodying this, living this, learning this, and dare I say this, even loving it. And there they are at a care home talking to older people. So finally, some top tips. The great philosopher Denzel Washington said, when you pray for the rain, you got to deal with the mud too. So none of this is easy, but it gets muddy. So be prepared for mud. Design experiences, not products, spaces, services, or systems. You're creating an experience. Design for people, not users or consumers. Users use, consumers consume, but people live. So let's try and remove that language out of our design rhetoric. Don't design from a distance. Immerse yourself as those students are doing. And very finally, you can create the most beautiful, inclusive product, but above all, make sure that your spelling is correct. And it took me 3 months to realize that this menu from Hong Kong as well should say braised vegetable and bamboo shoots. So don't design bamboo shit. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Rama. Bamboo shoots, yeah. Let me check on the Q&A. If not, we have some questions ready. So, Rama, thanks again for that. I think that was really quite inspirational and gives, especially as academics, it gives meaning to the idea of teaching design and to what design can do, I think, as well. Yeah. I'm addressing this question to the whole panel, just answer, you know, first take, first go. You can all answer it as well. Let's assume, for argument's sake, that extreme is really the new norm, and that the year before us are going to challenge human society and its way of conduct. As we have seen through the recent pandemic, well, given that, where do you think the tools you are sharing in your workshops should be applied? In which areas of activity, and what form of positive shift do you think you can expect them to generate, not regenerate? Should I point my finger? Kate, would you like to start?
Yeah, I can start. Well, I think I touched on it when I was talking about this idea of connectivity, and both Miriam and Rama also talked about this, the idea that you never design alone, and you're never actually, you know, designing in a self-congratulatory sense. You know, this is not an individual sport. So I think that one of the things that we're learning and we're looking at inside the workshop, and I talked about just now, is the idea of building connections and also understanding how we can use those connections to collaborate as designers, whether it be with other designers, whether it be with the people who we are designing for or with, communities or different kinds of groups that we design with. And I think also that the power of this is that we can do this both in our communities in a hyperlocal context, but then also we can do this at distance. So we can also be sharing and understanding through our networks, and that's obviously what we're doing in these workshops. We have, you know, students from Germany and Austria and China and Israel, and me being in Barcelona, but originally from Australia. You know, we have this very amazing ability to share beyond borders and kind of use storytelling and design to both bring people together, but then also bring ideas together and kind of create synergies. So I think that that for me is really powerful.
Thanks for that. Do you consider the idea of hyperlocal to be really relevant in the case of inclusive design, Rama? Because I mean, one of the things that is quite notable from the project you've shown is that a lot of them are about human attention. Where do you put your attention and your capability to generate attention to the needs of the person in front of you? How do you find that that meets the idea of hyperlocal and kind of global communication network when designing?
So I think it's probably expressed in this language. You know, design used to advocate for personality. Then if you shorten the word, it advocated for persona. And now it advocates for a shorter word, which is person. So inclusive design used to be about one size fits all. And now it's about one size fits one. So often inclusive design is about choice. It is about that hyper-local focus as well as global need. It's the personal and the universal brought together. And that's what we really encourage people to do in inclusive design, is you go deeply into the personal, but you also make it relevant to the global. So right now, I think the students are in the workshop, and one of the pieces of advice we gave to them is be led by the person that you spoke to, but you know, tomorrow make that as universal as you can. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's my heart's response.
I think it relates to it well. Let's given that all the panel members are academics, and continuing with the assumption, I'm not letting the assumption that extreme is the new norm. I actually made the term, so I don't think I'm going to let it go for the next 8 minutes or so that we have. But assuming that that extreme is the new norm, and that's where we're heading, and that's pretty dark assumption, but let's go with it for a few minutes more. What should or what could the role of design academies be in that future, or in that scenario of the future? Miriam, would you like to relate?
I think it's very important. I think Rama had
we have a sound problem, Miriam. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I know my microphone is not working. I don't know why. Do you hear me? Okay. So for two places, I think Rama had it and Kate had it also in their presentation, and I highly agreed that it is important that there's empathy. Empathy in every situation for the life and human being that is designing with us. So and also especially young designers, to teach them and show them that they are responsible for what they are designing. So if there is a startup coming up like called Airbnb, when I design a web page for them and it's a nice service they offer, what does that do to cities? It does the opposite what Rama is trying to do, right? It's the same scenario with Uber. In Berlin, it started to destroy the mixed cultural and social practices in the center of the city we had, because suddenly all apartments turned into Airbnb and there was no space left to rent because everyone wanted to have the experience of that, but it's starting to disappear. So this is what happens. So you look at that phenomenon and also sphere, they are putting themselves in. That's so important, I think, and the empathy. And regarding to the new extreme and the dark age, or the dark light or no light being there, in the workshop I had a wonderful student, and he worked on speculative design ideas with, it was HIT students and a student from Germany, and it was the HIT student Kobe who said, post-COVID, like you have the situation in Israel, everything is possible. You can design everything for everyone, and you can really try out things, and you can go really crazy and experience things and do them as a designer. So if a student says that to me or to another person in a workshop, that's my heartbeat so fast, and I'm so happy, because that's what I want to give them, and I think yeah, we all want that.
Thanks for that. I think the idea of empathy and responsibility is like interweaved through all your lectures. Kate, would you like to give us your thoughts on where the Academy should go given this speculative narrative?
Sure. Well, first of all, I don't necessarily think of myself as an academic per se, so just to clear that up. But
you're associated with one.
I have an association, that's right. But I think that, kind of building on what Miriam was saying, I think that the Academy, or the way that we educate and the way that we learn, both needs to be for resilience. So not necessarily in siloed approaches to design. So designing with and for multiple skill sets, and understanding design is a complex task, and not one that requires only one kind of, tick of paper and one degree. To design is a lifelong learning that needs many, many different skills and different facets. And we saw in Rama's presentation, some of those are social skills, and some of those may be, skills about how to collaborate or have empathy. So I think that the resiliency that needs to be built in to how we train and how we educate designers. And I think also that, there's this idea that you never really stop learning. So don't expect that you only learn in an academy. It's definitely not the case. I think you learn every day, everywhere, in every moment. So always have your senses on, always have your learning mind open, because I don't think you ever stop learning. Yeah.
I hope you don't. Though I think the process becomes slower with time. I mean, that's something I've noted with also you get less flexible, it seems. And it's rare to find flexibility with academics that are kind of older. Well, I'd like to thank you all for that. We've just slightly exceeded our time, but I think it was really worth the time. And I've enjoyed every minute of it. So thank you all for that. And hope our viewers had as interesting time as I did. And see you tomorrow on another extremely long day, which will end this week. So thank you, everyone, and good night. Oh, I thought that went well.
Thank you for the opportunity. And Kate, I loved your presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
I was taking and making notes.
Awesome. Anytime you wanna chat. Are you connected also to Daniel Charney?
Yeah, as a friend, and the FixEd program that he runs, actually.
Yes, I thought I heard you talk about that. Okay.
So in the early days, he was really supportive of the center, and we run a Fixperts Award at the center every year for for
Nice.
his group.
Nice.
So yeah, we're all friends. It's a
Cool.
mafia. It's a small little
Oh,
mafia.
I know. This kind of UK side of the, yeah, we know.
It's even worse, Kate, as Daniel Charney's brother, older brother, Gad, is actually a professor in our department.
Really? I think Daniel
It's
is
all incestuous.
the thread that runs between most of this International Design Week. I see this everywhere. But I heard you say this the other day, and it's yeah, it's nice. He's also kind of working in the master that I'm working in, so it's a nice connection. Yeah.
I think Fixbase is just something that's spread like fire. I think
Yeah,
just the
it's
whole
fantastic.
notion, it really works as an academic concept.
Absolutely.
It gets students to generate empathy on its own.
Absolutely.
It's really hard to do also. I mean, it happens by itself from the first person encounter that it generates. And I think that's really rare for a course or, any kind of academic encounter.
Absolutely. Yeah, very, very
Yep.
interesting. No, it's been great. Thank you so much for
Thank
the
you,
opportunity
guys.
to come and chat. Yeah,
Yeah.
super nice.
See you.
So we're looking forward to seeing the outputs tomorrow.
Same here.
Absolutely. Take care.
All right. Bye. Thank you.
Bye, guys.